So, welcome everyone to this Loudoun County Public Library program. My name is Miranda. I'm a librarian at LCPL. Today, we'll be getting some pie decorating tips and tricks from Lauren Coe. This program is being recorded and will be available on LCPL's YouTube channel in just a few days. If you have questions for Lauren, please type them into the chat. They'll go directly to me, and I will read them aloud when Lauren has a moment. So type them in whenever you can, and I'll get them to Lauren, and there will also be a Q&A at the end. Lauren Coe is an artist, self-taught home baker, founder of the popular Instagram account @Loco Kitchen, and author of the New York Times best-selling cookbook Pieometry, which you can see right behind her. Thank you for the Vanna White. Her colorful geometric style made all hell break loose on the frontier of contemporary pie art, and her iconic signature spoke design has been dubbed the modern lattice. So cool. Her work has been widely featured in publications such as Vogue, O Magazine, I read that article the other day, BuzzFeed's Tasty, and on screen in Martha Bakes, CBS Sunday Morning, and Hulu's Baker's Dozen. Lauren has roots in sunny San Diego, but is currently based in Seattle, Washington with her partner, Ben, and their bear dog, Santy. So, Lauren, what will you be showing us today?
Today, I'll be walking everybody through my signature spoke design. So I'll basically assemble an entire pie. So I'll roll up the bottom dough, I'll roll out the top dough, show you how to construct this spoke design. We'll talk through the filling, which is going to be a miso caramel apple filling, which is perfect for the season, but honestly, all year round. So it's a good one to kind of store in your pocket for next week or any holiday baking, but also to kind of keep in your back pocket for any time the craving hits. Yeah, so I'm going to go a little bit out of order today. Normally, when I'm just casually baking at home, I will roll out the top crust first so that I can put that in the fridge and keep it nice and cold. The golden rule of pie making is to keep everything cold at basically every stage of the process. And so we like to keep things nice and cold and chilled, and that will help preserve the butter and all those flaky layers that will bake up eventually. But for the sake of this demo and streamlining the process a little bit, I'm going to go a little bit out of order. We're going to talk about the filling first. So as I mentioned, today we'll be making a miso caramel apple pie. So much of what I do is informed by kind of using up what I have on hand. So I have a variety of apples because it's Washington, it's apple season. I just kind of have a surplus of a bunch of different varieties, but I do have a Cosmic Crisp here to talk about. It's my personal favorite apple to work with because it's so versatile. And it's got a good sweet, tart, balanced flavor. It's got a really nice crunchy texture that one is good for eating raw, but also holds up its shape really well when it's baked. So it works really well for my baked pies. And if you're familiar with any of my hand sliced tarts where I keep the apples fresh. So it's a nice one to have on hand because it works well for both desserts. And one of the nice things about this Cosmic Crisp, in addition to kind of its flavor and texture, is also that the flesh doesn't really oxidize. So for some of these fresh hand-sliced apple tarts, I don't have to treat the apple. I don't have to soak it in lemon juice or honey water. Just slice it up, place it on the tart, and it's ready to serve and holds up pretty well. But anyways, today we are making a pie. So I've prepped some of my apples. I've peeled them, sliced them. I think apple pie filling is pretty subjective to personal taste. So if you like to keep your apple peels on, if you like to cube your apples, I think that's great. For me, it's honestly, it depends on how lazy I feel that day. So today I'm on my best behavior and I've peeled all my apples, sliced them nicely. But sometimes if I'm in a rush or if I'm eager to get to the design process, I'll maybe leave the peel on and quickly chop the apples up. I think it works either way. It tastes good at the end, and honestly, that's the bottom line. So
we do have a quick question, Lauren, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Isabel was wondering, they're in San Diego and would love to know if you know a source of Cosmic Crisp apples there.
Um, I think I've seen them at Sprouts before. And also, hello, I'm originally from San Diego. And it's funny 'cause today I meant to say hi, hello from sunny Seattle, which is a wild thing to say at this time of year. Um, but anyways, yeah, I think I've seen them at Sprouts. I think you can always check the Cosmic Crisp website. They have a whole website because this apple was developed here in Washington. So they have a lot of information about how they developed this variety, and you can maybe check where they stock those. I've seen them here at Whole Foods, so maybe that's also an option as well. So as you can see, I've peeled my apple. I sliced off all four sides, avoiding the core and the seeds, and then I've sliced them up. They're not too thin. They're about an eighth of an inch wide. And then I'm just going to pop that into my bowl. I'll move the bowl over shortly. So I have my apple slices here, and then I'm going to add a little bit of granulated sugar, and my thickener of choice is tapioca starch. So I prefer tapioca starch over cornstarch or flour. I think it thickens with the fruit juices a little bit more dependably. And when it melds with all the fruit juices, it produces a clear gel rather than a cloudy gel when I use, flour or cornstarch. So that's just my personal preference. I've tossed that in. And all of these recipes are from my book. So you can check them out from the library, or it's available wherever books are sold. I'm just going to quickly toss the sugar and the tapioca starch through the fruit until it's pretty much coated. You can see, I'll try to give a good view here. And then we are working with some miso caramel today, which is a really lovely, it's almost like salted caramel, but a little less savory. I've used a white miso here, and it just lends a little extra umami, some dimension, some interest. And I'm just going to fold that through. If you have a sweet tooth, you can always put more. If you are like me and your palate runs towards less sweet is better, then you can always add a little less. And just going to fold that through until the fruit slices are mostly coated. It doesn't have to be too precise or even. We're going to plop that into our pie shell later, and once it bakes, the coverage won't really matter. So that's basically our filling. I don't usually cook my filling ahead of time because it just kind of adds an extra step, extra time, and I prefer to focus on the design. So again, as long as things taste good and work, then we're good. All right, so now I'm going to go grab my dough, which is in the fridge. So again, we want to keep everything cold. My dough is resting in the fridge. I'm going to pull it out right before I need to roll, which is now CRE.
This is a great moment to sound out in the chat. If you are coming from the Virginia area, I know we at least have one person from San Diego. Let me know where you're coming from.
All right. So I've got my dough here. I work with all butter pie dough. I prefer the flavor that butter lends to dough. And I think it also creates a dough that's a little bit more durable and holds up well, as opposed to a dough that is made with leaf lard or shortening, which tends to be a little bit more tender. So for some of my designs that require a little more handling, or a little bit more time, like this one, or any of my woven designs, I think the butter pie dough works well for me. So first, we're going to flour our work surface, sprinkle a little bit of flour. We'll put our nice cold disc of dough there on top, put a little bit of flour there, and we'll also flour our rolling pin as well. And so because this is going to be the bottom crust, we're going to try to roll this into as close to a circle as we can. It's not the end of the world if it's more cloud shape or blob shape, but we're going to do our best. And as you can see, I'm picking up this dough and moving it around just to make sure as we roll that it's not stuck to my work surface. It'd be really sad to roll out a really beautiful sheet of dough and then find out that it's just totally glued to your work surface at the end, and you have to crumple it up and re-roll it. So any questions, feel free to jump in. This is a good time to hop in while I work on this. You can kind of see, hopefully, the butter chunks in there and that marbling. That's exactly what you want to see in a pie dough. That's what's going to bake up into those lovely flaky layers.
Eileen was wondering what kind of rolling pin you're using.
Yeah, I have one of these, I think they're called French tapered. What's the trick here to showing it on camera on both angles? Um, Honestly, it's the one that I prefer because it was the rolling pin that I had way back in the beginning when I made my first pie, and it's just the one that I've become comfortable with. So I often get questions about, equipment and models and brands, and I'm not really loyal. I'm just, again, a big proponent of making use of what you have. So look around your kitchen. All the tools that I kind of reach for are just ones that I already have and have made work for me. But this one is kind of a lightweight tapered one. All right, so you can see it's not a super circle. It's totally fine. We're going to trim some of those extras. And to figure out if you have rolled it big enough, you can always flip your pie plate over, and you want to have a little bit of an overhang. So this is a good size. And I'll talk about pie pans really quick. One of the big ironies of my journey is that I don't really have a sweet tooth. I kind of stumbled into this pie journey on accident. And I actually don't love eating pie all that much. And so basically everything I make, I pawn off to friends, family, neighbors. I donate to fundraisers and essentially give them to anybody who will take one. So I use these disposable pie tins quite often, and they work really well. I prefer the ones that have a little bit more heft. There are some really lightweight foil ones, and those are really sad when you've constructed a full pie, and if you don't pick it up super carefully, it just kind of folds. But if you're looking for a reusable pie tin, this USA pan is my favorite one. I literally never get soggy bottoms in this pie tin, and my pies rarely stick. So this is my preferred go-to reusable. I think the glass Pyrex ones are also really nice, especially if you're kind of starting out on your pie journey. Because it's clear and glass, you can always carefully check as you're baking to see if the bottom of your pie is cooked through yet. So as you could see, I rolled my dough onto my rolling pin and then unfurled it over the pie plate. We don't really want to pick up the dough because that could lead to stretching, which in turn could lead to the dough shrinking when you bake it. So we want to handle with care, and transferring by rolling pin is super helpful for making sure that things don't get stretched. And again, I'm not jamming my dough into the pie plate. I'm kind of taking these edges and easing the dough into the pie pan. So you can see I've got some kind of crazy edges here. So I'm just going to take some kitchen shears and give it a quick trim just to make sure it's even all the way around. And we're going to go with a crimped edge at the end. So I will leave about an inch of extra dough around. And with these dough scraps, you can always bake them off right away for, pie cookies, pie fries, working snacks, as I like to say. The pie making process can be pretty lengthy with the time as it adds up. You have to make your dough, let it rest, and then once you make your pie, you have to let it chill before you bake, and then you have to bake it for several hours. So it can be a pretty lengthy process, and who doesn't love a few snacks in between while you're waiting? So I have my pie shell rolled out. I'm going to pour my prepared apple filling that we just made together. Put that in. If I'm being very meticulous, sometimes I'll tile these apple slices in one at a time. But today, this design is not as dependent on a super flat, even top surface. So I think kind of pouring this fruit in and generously mounding it over the top will work just fine as well. So, all right. Want to get some of those juices in there. Our tapioca starch was probably hiding in some of those juices. So we do want to get all of that in. clean off my hands. And now I'm going to grab my second disc of dough and roll that out. So 2 seconds.
Any other questions for Lauren during this portion of the process? I noticed that you have some extra apples left over. What do you do with those? More snacks?
More working snacks, or honestly, if I'm just baking here at home, I'll probably jam them in. But yeah, or usually I'm often making multiple pies at a time. So any extras will kind of move on to the next pie filling. Also, if I have any little bits and I don't feel like eating them, or I don't have another pie to add them to, I always freeze them. And then I can reach for them the next time I make a pie. So, all right, same process with this disc of dough. Flouring the work surface, making sure that our dough doesn't stick to the counter, flouring the top, flouring a little bit of our rolling pin. And then for this one, instead of a circle, we're going to try to roll it into a rectangle. So, again, it's nice and cold. See these lovely butter streaks. The cold helps preserve all those butter chunks in there, which again, create those flaky layers later. Trying to think what else I haven't covered. So we've talked about apples, we've talked about butter. Oh, I guess we haven't talked about butter. As I mentioned, I do like doing all butter pie dough. And in terms of the type of butter, I always go with unsalted. And because I go through such a high volume of butter, I actually just buy whatever's cheap or on sale, which means I go through a lot of just Kirkland brand Costco butter. And I think that works perfectly fine. Occasionally, if I want to splurge, I'll go with some Kerrygold because it's a little bit fancier, but still a little more affordable in terms of higher fat European butters. But I will say, if you're starting out on your pie journey, a higher fat butter can be a little bit trickier to work with because it is soft. But again, the cheap stuff that you can get at your local grocery store, that's going to work perfectly well. It'll make a really lovely crystal. And pretty much all of my designs can still be done with regular, affordable grocery store butter. All right, so the size of the rectangle that we're going for is that we want the short edge of the rectangle to be longer than the diameter of our pie pan. So we just want a little bit of room to work with. So I'm going to keep rolling a little bit. And this particular spoke design was inspired by those spirograph stencils that I used to play with as a child. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anybody, but at the time I was such a novice when it came to pie baking that I didn't feel comfortable doing any sort of like wildly abstract or art, kind of rustic designs that required hand cutting or, you know, curves or anything that was like floral or, you know, foliage designs. I was looking for designs that I could easily construct and make look precise with very little skill. And so this design was born because it's constructed of all straight lines. Okay, so I'm gonna move this crust or this dough onto a sheet of parchment, which I do for every single top crust that I work with. So even if I'm about to make the pie right away, I always put my dough on parchment because, again, we want to keep things nice and cold. If you're baking anywhere in the summer and it's super warm, or let's say you're doing some holiday baking and there's a million things baking in the oven, the house is super warm and your dough starts to get soft and sticky, this will allow you the opportunity to chill things down as you work. So I always put my dough on parchment. That way I can slide a flat baking sheet underneath it and stick it in the fridge for a few minutes to chill the dough back down if I need to. Again, as I mentioned, when I do this design just kind of on my own in the house, I will roll out this top crust first put it on parchment, and then leave it in the fridge while I do the rest of the process. So while I peel and slice my apples, while I mix the filling, while I roll out the bottom, that way when I'm ready to construct my design, this top dough is nice and cold. It's ready to work with and not soft, and I don't have to keep waiting for it to chill back down. So
Hey,
now
Lauren,
that this is, yes.
how do you know when the dough is getting too warm? Is it like by touching it and it's just like, the same temperature as your fingers?
I think so. I mean, usually you can start to tell because it's getting a little sticky. It gets really hard to work with. It definitely feels warm. So my dough is cold to the touch because it's chilled. And also, if it's too warm, your butter will start to melt. And that's basically why your dough will start to get soft and sticky. So it's a really tactile thing. Right now, I'm, touching this dough. It's not sticking to my hands. I can still kind of pick it up gently, and it feels cool to the touch. All right, so for this design, we are going to cut this full rectangle into strips on the short edge. And I'm right-handed, so I like to go right to left, which hopefully is not too confusing with these camera angles. The first step is just to trim off some of these raggedy edges, just the very edge. We'll add that to our little scrap pile. And then we are going to cut strips that are about the thickness of maybe a centimeter if we want to be super technical, or maybe a 1/4 inch wide. I never sit here and measure exactly. I pretty much just eyeball. So there's, yeah, again, kind of lazy. What's most important about this part is just making sure your ruler is secure so you get those nice straight lines, regardless of how thick or thin your strips are, although I don't recommend going any thinner than this because the strips will get a little melty, will get a little harder to work with. Sometimes people like to go thicker, and that provides a slightly different design, which is super fun. But this is my favorite width to work with. It produces a really striking design and easy to cut, easy to handle. And again, just another point to drive home the use what you've got method is that when I first made my first pie, when I first moved to Seattle in 2016, we had just moved across the country from Boston, and I didn't even have a ruler or, an extensive kind of baking pantry collection. And so I used the edge of a cookie sheet and a sharp knife to cut dough strips. So you don't need fancy equipment. I didn't even know that this existed at the time. So you can still create really lovely pie art just by kind of rummaging around your house usually.
Can you explain a little bit more about the tool that you were using to cut the dough?
Yes, so this is a rolling cutter. I think it's often used for pasta or pie. There's kind of a fluted edge too, which I, now that I think of it, never use. And just this kind of rolling wheel that makes cutting and slicing much faster and more efficient. I think they have these tools called bicycles that are multiples that are often used for pasta, and you could do this same process much quicker because there's a series of blades available. But I don't think this is too difficult and not too time intensive. So our strips are cut. I'm going to grab a little circle cutter. And so we'll need one of these, kind of like a biscuit cutter or a cookie cutter. If you don't have one, you can always use a small bowl or a small cup. Pie down here so we can see. And I'm just going to place the circle cutter right in the middle, gently on the surface of my pie filling. And that's basically going to serve as our stencil. And then before we start our design, I usually like to brush a little bit of water around the pie edge, and this will just help our dough strips stick and make sure they stay in place.
Does it matter the diameter of the circle that you were using in the center?
It doesn't. It'll just change your design a little bit more. I mean, if you want a bigger one, you can use a bigger one. If you want to use a smaller one, it all works the same. All right, so we're going to start our spoke design, and we are going to just take one strip of dough and place it straight across the surface of the pie and press those edges in. It should be touching the center kind of stencil at one point of the strip, and that's pretty much the technique. So we're going to take our second strip of dough and lay it straight across the surface. And this is where it sounds technical. So the end in your left hand will go to the left of the previous strip, and the end in your right hand is going to go to the right of the previous strip. But basically, we've got two straight lines that are intersecting. They're spaced out by about quarter or half an inch, and it is still touching that center circle point. And that's basically the entire technique. So we're just going to make our way around the pie by placing these straight strips, and you can see things are getting a little warm and sticky. Sometimes I see people constructing this design at home, and because it's a bit of an optical illusion, the tendency is to want to curve these strips around the circle center point. The design is all straight lines, so it's even easier than that. We just want to be placing straight lines and continuing to move in the same direction. So one strip separated by about the same distance. And we're going to make our way around the surface of the pie twice. So right now you can see this is basically a single crust. We're going to go all the way around until we have a double layer. That's when you stop. Or you stop when you use up all your dough. Either way. I think sometimes, again, because this is sort of an optical illusion, I teach this design in my workshops as well. People get a little confused. They look away and they come back and their eyes feel a little fuzzy and they're like, oh no, what's the next step? Just try to remember that you're continuing to move in the same direction. Same process of placing straight dough strips and then just moving along the circle. And again, making sure you're grazing that center circle. If everything's spaced correctly, your dough strips shouldn't pile up all at the same point. So they should be staggered. And you can see, hopefully you can see, maybe I'll pick this up. In this section right here, you can see that there's a double layer of dough now. Ooh. That's what we want all the way around the surface. So it's still single, so we're going to keep moving, keep covering the pie. Turn it so I can place the strips a little bit more easily. Now we are coming up towards the end. So you can see there's double crust here, and just a small section of single strip. So we know that that's the section we still have yet to cover. And we'll just use one more. And we're done. So I'm gonna move this tray out of the way. Comes together really quickly. I think one of the best gimmicks, as I like to say, about my designs is that they look way more complicated than they are to execute. I am a self-taught hobbyist home baker. I have no professional training in pastry or culinary. I'm actually terrible at math. I have no experience in the engineering space. So I truly believe that if I can do this, anybody can. Okay, so the next step, as you could see, I was just pressing the ends of these strips into that bottom dough to make sure they're secure. And now we are going to roll this edge in. So this raw edge is basically going to get tucked in. And this is the first phase of our crimped edge. So it doesn't have to look perfect. It doesn't need to look precise. It just needs to be more or less secure. So I kind of liken this to an empanada roll. So you're kind of tucking and rolling as you go. Just again, making sure that raw edge is super tucked in there. And the other important part as you're doing this is making sure that you're crust edge is sitting on the edge of your pie plate. Anything that's hanging over is probably going to melt off when you bake it. So you want to make sure that it's securely sitting on the edge of that pie pan or pie plate that you're using. I keep rolling. Hopefully you can see. Basically just tucking in, tucking in. And this is a good technique for basically creating a barrier for keeping in all your fruit juices as they bake. Okay, so that's phase one. And now to make those pointy kind of triangle points on the crimped edge, I'm going to basically use these two fingers and push the dough in between to create a little triangle. And I'm going to do that all the way around. Hopefully you can see. Yep. And then in the center, I'm basically pushing down to create a well for those baked juices to settle. And at this point, you want to make sure that your edge is now well sealed. If it's super loose, you run the risk of the crust kind of unfurling as you bake. This is a good opportunity to really seal those edges. Continuing to create these points. Again, if your dough is getting a little warm or sticky and they start to stick to your fingers, you can always dust your fingers with a little bit of flour and then continue on. So that's pretty much the crimped edge. Sometimes I'll go back through twice just to make sure the points are nice and crisp. Make sure everything's even, make sure everything's sitting nicely on that pie edge. And then the very last step is to gently remove the circle cutter. And there you have it, my signature spoke. Okay, there we go. And then we can talk a little bit about baking. So again, we're going to go back to the golden rule, which is to keep things cold. Instead of popping this straight into the oven, I recommend chilling it in the fridge for at least 20 to 30 minutes or while your oven heats up. Because I give away my pies so often and I can't bake them, well, I can't bake them off fast enough, to be honest. I usually put this in my freezer on a level surface until it's frozen and the design is set, and then I'll wrap it in a couple layers of plastic, label it with the date and the filling, and then I'll just leave it in the freezer until I'm ready to bake. When I have the opportunity to share a pie or serve it somewhere or give it away, then I'll pull it straight from the oven, put it on a rimmed baking sheet to catch any juices or any melted butter. It's so much easier to scrub a baking sheet than the bottom of your oven, not that I would know from experience. Place it on a baking sheet and then straight into a hot oven. I don't thaw it. This is another great tip for kind of breaking up that really lengthy process of pie making. Let's say, next week you're in charge of baking the entire feast and you also have to provide a pie for dessert and you don't have, the time to also concentrate on making a pie. You could make one this week, put it in your freezer, and then when you're ready to bake, just pop it in frozen. In terms of egg wash, when I use my plain all butter pie dough, I like to do a whole egg with a splash of heavy cream and then brush a little bit over the top, maybe sprinkle some demerara sugar for extra crunch or shine. And then if you're familiar with my work, sometimes I work with colored doughs and I work with all natural coloring. So I only do fruit juices, vegetable powders. For any pies that include any of the colored doughs, I don't egg wash those because the egg wash is what helps bring that really lovely golden brown color when you're baking. And for the colored ones, we want to preserve as much of the color integrity as we can. So I don't egg wash those. Yeah, and this design works really well with apples because this is like an extra portal for additional caramel for those people who have a really big sweet tooth. It's also really great for summer berries. You can pop some fresh ones in the middle when it comes out of the oven just for a fun little garnish. That's pretty much it. I can show you, as the common question on my Instagram is, but what does it look like baked? Like magic television. This one is a strawberry plum, so it's kind of the last of my summer fruit treasures. So peak season stone fruit, peak season berries, you can tell it was super juicy. I personally love what I call the blurpage, when all those juices kind of bubble over and make the crust, give the crust a lot of different texture. But this is what it looks like baked. I forgot to cover this like middle section. It got a little dark, but for me, those are the best parts, extra crispy and golden and flaky. Any questions?
Those look so good, Lauren. We do have a question. It looks like Eileen was wondering what the most common mistakes in pie making are.
Yeah, I think one of them is overworking your dough. So unlike bread dough, you don't want to knead your pie dough a lot. You also don't need it to be a fully like sticky dough when you make it. I find that mine's pretty dry and maybe a little bit crumbly. And then I let it rest in the fridge so that the gluten can form, the flour can form with the liquid. So you don't need to overhydrate your dough, nor do you want to overwork it. Overworking it can result in a tough crust. Because you're kind of obliterating your butter chunks. You want to be able to see those butter chunks, those butter streaks, which are going to bake up into a really tender, flaky crust. So not too much liquid, not overworking your pie dough, and then again, not keeping things cold. So in a pinch, somebody might bake this and the dough's, been sitting out for a while. It's a little warm. I think it will still be delicious, but some of the crisp kind of points and the straight lines on your design might get a little lost in that really lovely oven heat. Again, it'll still taste good, but you probably won't get as sharp of that kind of design integrity that you worked hard for. So keeping things cold at every step, including chilling your pie before it bakes, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive. I think those are my top 3 tips.
Do we have any other questions? Go ahead and message me. Oh, I see. What are some other techniques you use that we didn't get to see today? I believe you did have one other thing that you could show us if we had the time.
Yeah, it looks like we have the time. So I do have another demo prepared. Let me pull my cutting board back here. This is what I call this full demo is miso caramel apple 2 ways. So we've seen the traditional double crust pie. This is going to get chilled and then baked. It'll be super golden and flaky. And then I also have my hand sliced apple tart that I talked a little bit about earlier. So let's see if I can get this into frame. So all these recipes are in my book. This one is what I call my back pocket dessert. In a pinch, it uses very simple pantry ingredients. Many people often have these in their kitchen already. So in an emergency, it's very easy to whip one of these up as compared to a pie where, it takes a little bit of time and planning. This is a super easy shortbread crust. It's all-purpose flour, some butter and powdered sugar, all mashed together. There's no danger of overworking it. You can obliterate it. It will still turn out beautifully. It's basically a giant cookie. Bakes for 20 minutes. So really simple. And then this is my favorite no-cook filling. It's a little bit of cream cheese sweetened with powdered sugar, and a dash of cinnamon. Or today I've swirled in some of that miso caramel that I had prepared for the pie to give it another, fun, lovely, sweet, savory touch. And then I've folded in a little bit of whipped cream to give it some lightness and make it a little bit fluffy. And so I have my cooled crust. You want to make sure that this crust is nice and cool before you put this filling on, otherwise it'll melt. Just going to plop that right on. Again, super simple, very few ingredients. And then I'm going to take my offset spatula and smooth it over the surface of the crust. Again, it doesn't have to be super even or perfect. We do want to leave about a 1/2 inch around the edge empty so that as we put the fruit on, the cream might spread a little bit, and that way it spreads onto the crust instead of over the edge of the crust. So it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. We're going to cover it with fruit. So you can see this all comes together really simply and quickly. Obviously, I had the elements prepared, but even if you're starting from the very beginning, it's very quick, very easy. And you've basically got a dessert. And this pairs really well with all kinds of fruits. So in the summer, I love using stone fruit. or berries make a really lovely garnish. This one is really fun to bake with kids if you have any. It's super easy and simple, and also really fun and tactile for them to be able to kind of place the fruit on top. Here is my variety of apples that I talked about earlier. And this particular design works really well with a single variety of apples. I think even if it's all one color, it still looks really cool. Or you can work with multiple colors and organize the colors as you go for an ombre effect or a rainbow effect. We're just going to randomly pick some apples here. And basically, we're just going to slice them thinly. If you have a mandolin, this is a good time to pull that out. I'm personally too terrified to own one. I just know that I will lop off an arm and lose a bunch of fingers if I have one. So I just have a sharp chef's knife. Again, this is the one that I've had in my kitchen for a while. It's what I'm comfortable using. Whatever one that you have and are accustomed to is what's going to serve you best. As long as it's sharp, that's the main key. So again, I'm just going to cut all 4 sides off the apple, avoiding the core. And usually at this point, my dog will hear the knife and the apple on the cutting board, and he'll just be sitting right here looking up at me begging. And then we're just going to hand slice them super thinly. I'll pull out one of these slices for you to see. So it's not paper thin, it's not necessarily translucent, but it still has a little bit of movement to it. So we want some flexibility, but we still want enough structure that it can hold and kind of stand on its own when placed with a bunch of these slices. So just gonna go quickly through. Am I doing this? Okay, making sure that you all can see. Of course, I didn't clean off my work surface. It's nice and floured. Cutting board's wobbling a little bit, but anyways. This is basically the entire technique is trimming off these little bits. This is what I will either snack on or toss to my dog. And then slicing these apple. This is nice because even if you are practicing your knife skills and your slices, turn out slightly different. Maybe one's a little bit thicker, maybe some are thinner, maybe you're working with apples of different sizes. What's lovely about this design is that the more variation you have in your fruit, the more texture and dimension it adds to your design. So it's kind of precise, but also abstract at the same time, which is really fun. So I have some apple slices prepared, and let me just wipe off some of this apple juice. And then we are going to take these apple slices and basically lay them in a staggered row. So they're separated by about ½ inch, ¼ inch, kind of like that. I'll usually do 4 to 5 or whatever feels manageable at a time. And then we're going to place them cut side down right on the surface of our tart. I think this original design was inspired by the movement of like waves and water. So sometimes I like to curve these rows. For this particular design, I do like to start in the center and then work my way outwards. So just that's the whole technique. Same process is basically creating these rows of apple slices. And you can see some of these are a little bit thicker, some are thinner. It's totally fine. The macro view of the finished product, you won't even notice. And then basically fitting these rows of apples together. They're kind of staggered. And then, so you can see when I talked about working with different colored apples, you can always do sections of the same color or different rows of different colored apples, but it also looks really cool, even if you're working with kind of a monochromatic palette here. So again, just staggering these rows, putting them all together. And if you choose varieties of apples like Honeycrisp or Cosmic Crisp that don't really oxidize, this is basically the last step of your tart. You don't have to brush anything over. You don't have to soak your apples. I still recommend serving right away because we don't bake this any further. It's best if fresh, but it does hold up pretty well if you choose the right varieties. And this also works really well with pears, which is fun. pears tend to brown a little bit more quickly, so that can be something to watch out for. So basically, I'm just slicing apples until the surface of the pie is covered. This particular apple is grown by some of our friends here in Washington. It's called a lemon drop apple, which is really fun. It's got a lovely kind of lemony note and aroma. That's another fun way to play with kind of texture and flavor. Again, just building out these staggered rows of apple slices and then placing them in your tart pressed up against this fruit. I'll just keep slicing. I don't like to slice all my apples at once because it can be kind of hard to predict sometimes how many you'll need. I like to slice as I go, so I just end up cutting just what I need. And yeah, you can see that it's starting to come together. It's really fun when you have those contrasting colors. And as you can hopefully tell, it doesn't really matter if some of your strips or some of your slices are a little bit thicker or taller. Just again adds to the interest of the design and creates a really lovely dimension to it. And this tart is also really easy to customize in terms of flavoring. You can do a different kind of filling with that cream cheese powdered sugar base. You can flavor it with different spices or things like cocoa powder. Freeze-dried strawberry powder is really fun because that also brings a really lovely color to it. And then just fold through a little bit of whipped cream to lighten it up and make it stretch a little bit more. So continuing to place these slices. Any questions? Feel free to pop in with those.
I'm not seeing any yet, but I had a question. Can
Yeah.
you turn this into a baked version?
You probably could, but I wouldn't do that with this filling. This filling will just melt. And then because this crust is, flat and doesn't have an edge, everything's just going to spill over. So I would consider a crust with an edge, maybe the speckless crust, like a press-in crust, and you can put it in a tart pan. I have recipes for those in my book. I think New York Times has a recipe with a design that looks very interestingly similar to this one, and it is baked. I'm not sure what else they put. Seems like they just slice up the apples, put that in the crust, and then sprinkle maybe some sweetener or maybe some spices in there. So you could bake it, but I wouldn't bake it in this particular form. So maybe using the all buttered pie dough to line a pie plate or a tart pan, and then going with a different filling.
Okay, we have another question from Katrina. How do you serve this tart? Is it easy to cut and is it still pretty after you cut it?
Yeah, one of my favorite things is slicing up this tart because it looks really cool now. And then when you slice it up, every slice kind of has a different design, which is really fun. Again, I reach for my super sharp chef's knife. Usually I'll chill it, for 10, 15 minutes just to make sure the filling is nice and cool and firm. That will help keep your fruit in place. And then basically the process is holding the fruit in place and just kind of sawing gently through with your hopefully really sharp knife, and then getting through the filling and then pressing down to make sure it cuts through your crust. And then usually I'll wipe off the knife, clean it off to get those really nice pristine cuts, and then do the same process to get that next slice. Sometimes your apple slices might fall a little bit, and it's super easy to kind of reconstruct or squeeze those back onto each slice. I think a sharp knife is key, and usually a big chef's knife is more helpful than maybe a smaller one that kind of has some difficulty cutting through all of that kind of height and dimension. Yeah. So recommend cutting through the fruit before pressing down. If you just kind of press from the very beginning, things get a little sploogy and your tart might get smushed. So making sure you're cutting through the fruit and then pressing down through the filling and the crust.
Someone else was wondering if you can buy miso caramel.
Maybe. I think there are so many things that are available to us everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if that's on the market somewhere. But I haven't seen it, although I haven't really looked for it. It's pretty easy to make. I think for me, it's just sugar and water, and you boil it until it starts to turn golden. I take it off the heat, pour in some heavy cream, and then whisk in some miso, and that's the miso caramel. But it's possible that you could purchase it somewhere. I'll have to keep my eye out. I've never really thought about that. Maybe at a specialty store, especially now that, stuff like that is getting a little bit more popular. All right, so that's pretty much the entire tart I finished. It was about 2 apples with a little bit of extra bonus. And there you go. You can see how different colors can make a really fun design with variation, or how a monochromatic palette will also work really well. So this is one of those I recommend serving immediately or the same day. It will still taste pretty good the next day and the day after. It'll just maybe look a little less fresh. Miso caramel apple, 2 ways.
Fabulous. So those are both in your Pieometry cookbook?
Those are both in my Pieometry cookbook. The miso caramel filling on the tart is technically not, but it's basically a variation of the cream filling that is in there. All of these design techniques are in there as well. So, yep, should be able to find those in Pieometry.
Fabulous. Okay, so we still have a couple minutes. Does anyone have any other questions for Lauren? It could be pie related, could be tart related, could be book related. Her Instagram is amazing. I hear she has a cute dog. Any
I
questions?
do. I think my husband has corralled Santi, so otherwise he'd probably be here barking at traffic passing by, and you might see him, but he's hidden away for now.
Ooh, Katrina wants to know what your favorite savory pie is.
Ooh, I love this question because obviously I'm team savory. So there's a tomatillo short rib pie in my book that is like prime for cozy season because it's comfort food, it's warm, it's a little bit spicy, really hearty. It's basically like a stew in a pie. I really like that one. And then there's a cheddar and potato tart that I make, and I often pair it with my everything bagel crust. And I've actually been banned from making that too often in the house because I'll make it and it'll sit on our kitchen counter, and then anytime anybody walks by the kitchen, we'll like snag a piece, and then it'll be gone in a day, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but all in moderation. What else? Yeah, there is a butternut mac and cheese pie that I often make around this time of year. It's a good side dish. I pair it with a whole wheat cheddar chive crust, so carb load, carb overload, but it is lightened up with a little bit of butternut squash, which is really fun.
Any other questions? We had someone say thank you.
Oh, thank you all for coming and participating. I know this time of year, super busy and crazy, and everybody's got lots of things on the calendar. So I'm really grateful to everybody who's attended tonight.
Someone really loved the 2 different angles, seeing you do it and also seeing it from the top. Yeah, great angles.
Yeah, I'm a very visual learner. So for me, it helps to kind of be able to see as much as I can. And so I'm glad this was useful.
Okay, everyone's saying thank you. So I'm just going to drop some links in the chat here. I have one for the YouTube channel, which this recording will be on in a few days. So if you wanted to come back and rewatch Lauren, how she did a certain part of the crust or a certain bit of the apple. We also have the link to Lauren's book, Pyometry, through Loudoun County Public Library. It's free. We also have more virtual and in-person programs through Loudoun County Public Library. There's an online calendar link. And then, of course, a link to Lauren's website. A reminder, her Instagram, amazing, is at Loko Kitchen, L-O-K-O Kitchen. And thank you so much, Lauren. You are amazing. I'm fangirling all over.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.